All right, we're here to talk about IP copyright and contractual issues. My name is Brian Nitzkin. I come from the great state of California, although I was not born there, so I can't lay too much claim to it. But there, where I've worked for the past 20 years, I've worked for a company called Myriad Pictures. Myriad has been around for 20 years. They are an international sales company, production company, and financing company, specializing primarily in independent film, but also a little bit of television. But that is not why I'm talking to you today. For the past 20 or so years, I have been working in Hollywood for companies like Myriad and also for studios such as Universal and Paramount and smaller production outfits like Avalon, Global, and Giant Enterprises. And with all of those different landing spots, I have primarily worked in business and legal affairs departments. So what we are talking about today is not sexy or exciting, but it is important. And I want to be respectful of the time, so I am a fast talker. I apologize if I go too fast. Please feel free to tackle me after this and ask me whatever interesting questions you have. I'm here till Friday. So why don't we start with IP and copyright, because they're sort of intrinsically linked. IP, or intellectual property, is something that should be very important, of the utmost importance, especially to all the creators in the room. What's great about IP and copyright is that as soon as you come up with an idea for a film or a television series or a TikTok video even, once that idea pops in your head and you take that idea and put it down on paper, in a script form, or even just an outline, or I know a lot of people like decks, whatever form it takes, when you put that idea onto paper, that idea is yours. That is your intellectual property. But how does anybody else know that? Well, that's where copyright comes into play. So it's very important that in the life cycle of a particular project, film, television, whatever, that there is a proper and clean chain of title. What is chain of title? Chain of title lets anybody who needs to know who owns the project and how the ownership of that particular project is transferred from party to party over the life cycle of that project. Usually that ownership begins with you, the creator, whoever came up with the idea. But in order to assure yourself a place in that chain, you need to register that idea as a copyright. Well, how do you do that? Well, you do that the same way you do it anywhere in the world, even in the States. You register your work with your government agency. And I did a little bit of research. It's pretty easy to do it here, and it's not that expensive, about 500 grand. So if you have a script in any form, even if you plan on doing 10 more rewrites, doesn't matter. That first script, you should register with the Copyright Office, okay? Because that gives you ownership of a piece of property. What does ownership give you? Well, I've heard a lot of panels over the last couple of days about the industry here and in Africa in general, and I want to make a very important distinction. There is a difference between pride and ownership. There is no shortage of pride of what the creators have for the work that they do. It's in space. There's no question about it. Ownership is something a little bit different. That's where you get into contracts and money and what you actually own. So when you do create a property, a script, a television series, a film, whatever it is, what you're essentially doing is you're giving birth to something that comes with it many, many rights. And I'm not just talking about distribution rights, of which there are several, probably about 30 different distribution rights. And I'm talking about theatrical, when you release a movie in theaters, to home video and DVD, which is still prevalent in parts of the world, to various forms of television, pay television, free television, and of course, video on demand, which is its own category, of which there are about 7 or 8 different rights. Video on demand can be minimalized into something like subscription video on demand, which is our good friends Netflix over there, or ad-supported video on demand, or transactional video on demand whenever you buy a movie from iTunes or Amazon. The point is, there's a lot of different rights that as a creator, you now own. Those are distribution rights, but then there are also the other rights that I feel like most people don't really consider. And these rights are merchandising, stage rights, novelization rights, music rights, which include music publishing, music performance, music royalties, retransmission rights, which means that every time your film gets played anywhere in the world, there's a tiny bit of money that goes into a bucket. That's retransmission rights. And with all these different ancillary rights, the question becomes, well, who gets to get money from those rights? The answer is you, the owner. But if you, the owner, don't know you have those rights, you probably don't know to claim those rights. So it's very important when it comes to IP and copyright to understand that when you give birth to an idea, and I just keep using that analogy because it's kind of the easiest, but you know what I mean. When you give birth to an idea, you are creating all of these different forms of rights associated with your idea. And the best part about it is that when you create that idea, all those rights are yours. Now, over time, you may give up rights to another person or another company. You may license rights for a period of time to another person or another company. But when you begin and when you register your work, all those rights belong to you. And that's very, very powerful. It's not about pride, it's about ownership. And so it's very important to understand that. And how this dovetails into contractual issues. I didn't come up with the title of this, by the way, but it's just, we'll talk about contractual in general. I can't impress upon all of you enough, whether you are a creator, a distributor, a streamer, wherever you kind of land in the food chain of this business, how important contracts are. Again, not sexy, not exciting, kind of gives people a headache if they have to even look at one, let alone draft one, or might not even negotiate one. But they are so, so critical. Because contracts are your lifeline to ensure that the rights that you have given birth to are controlled. And so when you're doing a deal, and I'll put it in very simple terms, you make a movie, you're talking to a distributor, and that distributor says, we want to distribute your film, there's going to be a contract. That contract is going to lay out really basic but essential terms. What they're acquiring, how much money they're paying for those rights, if in fact they are paying any money for those rights, what rights they're acquiring, which is important. I know that streamers are a big part of the business here, but please remember, streamers do not represent all rights, okay? They cannot represent all rights. They can't release your film on home video. They can't release your film through pay TV and free TV. They can release your film through video on demand. And in some cases, only one form of video on demand, or maybe two forms of video on demand. So when you make a deal with a streamer, which is a great deal to make, don't get me wrong, please keep in mind and understand that you are licensing a small number of rights to that buyer, but you're leaving all these other rights on the table. And oftentimes, streamers won't allow you to do anything with those other rights. So it's just important to be mindful of what you have, what you control, and most importantly, what you own as a creator. So that when you are doing deals with a streamer or a distributor or whoever, you understand completely what you're giving up, and I don't mean that in sort of a negative way, what you're licensing, but also what you're holding on to. Another good example is when you make a deal with, let's say, an all-rights distributor, a distributor in Germany, and they want to acquire your film for all of those distribution rights, because they're not just going to release your movie on VOD, they're going to go through all those different forms of exploitation. One thing to think about is they'll usually ask for all rights. Well, they don't need all rights. They don't need airline rights. So you can hold back airline rights. They don't need music publishing rights. You can hold that back, and don't be afraid to say, I want to reserve these rights because I'm the producer or I'm the owner. Because in actuality, they don't need those rights to do the job that they are hired to do. Okay, so if they're not going to release the film theatrically, why give somebody theatrical rights? What can you do with those theatrical rights? Who knows? Who cares? But at least they're yours to decide to do with what you want. So be mindful when you're doing those kinds of deals to be thorough about it, to understand what you're giving to that other party and what you're keeping for yourself. And more importantly than all of that is as it pertains to ownership. I understand that some deals that are made here, you have streamers or distribution companies or other companies other than yourself coming in and say, okay, your project is going to cost, let's just say, $1 million. We'll put up half the money but we want to own the project entirely, or we want to own 75% of the project. Sometimes that's a good deal. Because if your intention as a creator is you want to make a sale and let's just be honest, you just want to make the thing, sometimes that's the best deal on the table and you take that deal, even though you're giving up a lot of ownership of your property. But other times, if you're thinking more of a long game, if you're thinking more internationally, if you're thinking of ways downstream to monetize some of these other smaller rights, like merchandising and music and remake rights, which are very important here, you have to think about if you just gave up 75% ownership of your film and you only have 25% left, then any downstream monetization, you're only getting a quarter. So again, it's not good, bad, or indifferent. It's just be mindful, be aware, take the time to really read through things, understand things. If you have the ability and the resources, have a lawyer look at it as well. But I don't want to stress too much on that part of it because quite honestly, it all just boils down to good old common sense. You are the creator of a project, you own all these rights, they're yours. So it is up to you to decide what it is you want to do with them. And there's going to be buyers and partners all along the way that are going to try to help you take your project, your idea, your script, and turn it into a movie. And you need to negotiate and decide what is the best opportunity for you and most importantly, for the project. It's ownership like you own anything else. If you're selling a house, do you want to sell it with the furniture in it or not? Maybe you want to keep some of that stuff for yourself. Well, if you sell it with the furniture, maybe you get a higher price. If that's what's important, go for it. Nothing wrong with that, okay? So contracts are important from a chain of title standpoint, from an ownership standpoint, really from a standpoint of who owns and controls what. Because as you move down kind of the timeline, the life cycle of a project, when you get to the point where we all want to get to where you make a movie, you sell it to a distributor, now you start delivering to that distributor, one of the core deliverable items that any distributor anywhere in the world, any streamer anywhere in the world, the first thing they're going to ask for is chain of title. They want to make sure that the thing that they are acquiring, that there are no holes, that there are no people coming out of the woodwork saying, wait a minute, that was my idea, and I can prove it. All right, so your chain of title and that being clean and clear with no gaps is of the utmost importance, not just for you as the owner of that, but all the way down the line when you actually want to sell your project to buyers. They're going to look at that as sort of the proof positive, yeah, you are the owner of this. Great. So that's why it's very, very important to really have a good head about you when it comes to stuff like that, even though I know it's not super interesting. But at the beginning part of the process, and by beginning I mean you have that idea in your head, that's when you need to start putting it in writing, registering it with the Copyright Office so that it is yours, your name is assigned to it, and that anybody, anywhere in the world that wants to do anything with that great idea you have, they got to go to you because you own it, okay? Now there are obvious exceptions to these kinds of things. There are different types of property that are in what's called public domain. A lot of Shakespeare's works, a lot of old historical novels. Those are things which anybody can take and do anything that they want with. But even in those cases, when you're talking about adaptations, when you're turning a book into a movie, or you're doing a remake of an older movie into a new movie, still register that copyright. Because again, that remake, that adaptation needs to reside with someone or a few people or a company. And unless you raise your hand as the owner of that idea, nobody else is going to do it for you, okay? I know I'm going really fast. Does all that make sense so far? Okay, really good. Not ahead. Okay, great. I want to go a little bit deeper into the contract side of things just to understand that when it comes to dealing with kind of the minutia of contract work, well, let's move past the point where you have the great idea. You got the great idea. Everyone's got a great idea. Now you're going to get into the part where you're actually going to go make your movie, okay? And I'm sure most of you in this room right now have been involved in this process time and again, and it doesn't hurt to repeat it. That having contracts across the board as early in the process as possible is paramount. And I'm talking about contracts with your writer, with your director, with your lead actors, with everybody that's producing on the film, regular producers, executive producers, any and everybody that is going to be working on this film, whether they are providing a specific service, whether they are providing financing to the film, everybody should have a contract with the production company. This ensures protection not only for the copyright owner, so that, again, nobody can lay claim to, well, wait, I worked on that movie and never got paid, I'm going to take you to court. And it's important that just everything is just sort of buttoned up and flowing through the same mechanism so that it's clear and it's transparent and there's no wondering what's going on and who's involved and how you can be involved. Okay? So you may come across as creators, people that say, hey, I loved your idea, I read your script, or I heard your pitch in this pitch competition. I think I can probably get some money for your film. And here's the deal. If I raise some money, I want 5% of whatever I bring to the table, and I want you to give me an executive producer credit. This is not uncommon practice. This happens all the time in Hollywood, especially in independent film. There's nothing wrong with it, because people have access to different resources in different ways. They don't want to necessarily commit hardcore and long term to saying, I am going to be your guy on this project, and here's what I'm going to do. It's more of a, let me see what I can do, and if something comes of it, then now you got to give me credit and you got to pay me. Even in those situations, put it in writing. Even if that guy that promised he was going to go raise some money, you never hear from him again, doesn't matter. Put it in writing. Put it in writing and give him a time. All right? Say you got 6 months to raise money. At the end of 6 months, we're done. This deal is null and void. You have no other rights and no other claims to this property. It sounds overly litigious, even as I say it. But believe me when I tell you, it takes very little time, very little effort, very little expense to protect yourself, okay? And this is where it becomes really important. I don't know if you heard right now, but there's a couple of strikes going on in the States, writers and actors. One of the issues that has come about from these strikes, and really if you look at the history of strikes in Hollywood, it's the issue for every strike, is actors, and in this case writers, are not getting paid what they should. Not getting paid in terms of residuals. In fact, you have people coming out left and right that are on shows that are suddenly, kind of gaining a second life on streaming platforms that, are 5 years old or 10 years old or whatever. And I'm sure we've all binged them ourselves. But you hear from actors that say, I never got a penny from so-and-so streamer. I never got anything, even though they're rebroadcasting and rebroadcasting and rebroadcasting. Now, I'm not trying to draw a straight line to what's happening in the strikes to your protection as an owner, but you understand a little bit why it is so important that you own your work and that you understand what it is you own. All of those rights, all of those ancillary rights that you've never even heard of and don't even know what they mean. It doesn't matter, you own them. So you know what? It's probably in your best interest to understand what those rights are. Because it's not simply just about taking a project, selling it to a distributor, seeing it on the television screen, telling your friends and family, here's that thing I just spent the last 2 years working on and now you can see it. That's the beginning of the process. What still is left undone are all these other rights that you own in ways in which you can monetize it. True, not every film needs to be turned into a video game. Not every film or television show has merchandising potential. But some do. And you don't know what they are. It's not just Marvel. It's not just Star Wars. It's not just Star Trek. It can be the most random thing in the world. How many of you have ever been to like a Comic-Con or anything like that? You know that there are fan bases for the most unusual things in the world. Okay? And fan bases are important because they're obviously going to drive your product out there. And what do fan bases love? Stuff. They love stuff. They love merchandise. They love all kinds of cool stuff. They love the soundtrack to your movie that doesn't really have a soundtrack, but they'll buy that soundtrack. Guess what? You own those rights. The minute you come up with that idea, you own those rights until you give them away. And hopefully you don't give them. Hopefully you're selling them or something like that. But all I'm trying to say is just keep in mind, understand the power that you have as creators, that you own a lot of rights the minute you come up with that idea, and it is your job and responsibility. And I understand that in previous panels, people were talking about, well, what responsibility do we have to the greater world in terms of our product? Your responsibility as creators is to understand what you have and not just give it up without careful consideration. Because once you do give it up, it is no longer yours, and you cannot lay claim to it anymore. Now, just to be clear, sometimes it's okay to give it up. If you find a buyer that is willing to finance your project to a large degree, maybe even entirely, then that's a deal worth making. Or maybe sometimes you're making your first project and all you want to do is just get your money back so you can make your second project and maybe your third and your fourth project. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that either. One of the things that we do at Myriad and what most sales companies do when we first talk to producers, directors, writers, creators is we ask this question. What's the goal of your project? What do you want to have happen? You want to get it on a streaming platform so you can tell all your friends and family this is where you can see that thing? Do you want to get it as far and wide around the world in as many eyeballs as possible? Do you want to play the festival circuit? Do you want to win a bunch of awards, get a lot of accolades and laurels? Do you want to just make your money back? The great thing is that there's no wrong answer to those questions, all right? The only question really is how many of those answers are true for your project. And the last thing I want to say really quick, and I know I'm going really, really fast, is I want you to also think of these projects, these films, these television series, whatever it is, this idea that turns into something else. Each one of those is a business, and it's your business. You are the owner of that business. So what do you want that business to be? Do you want that to be an award-winning business that doesn't make any money? Do you want that to be purely a financial decision as a business that you want to make your money back so you can go out and make the other ones? But whatever the answer is, just remember, it's your business. You wouldn't just give away parts of your business for nothing, would you? So please keep that in mind, be mindful of that. Read contracts, have contracts, don't be afraid of them. I know it's not exciting or sexy, but it is essential, and trust me, it will save you, and more importantly, it will protect your ownership of your film, which is almost as important as the pride that you have. Thank you for giving me the time to